Well, happy August, ladies. Can you believe the summer is already halfway gone? I mean, where did it go? Anyway, I hope you guys have been having a great summer. I can't complain. It's been beautiful here. This month, we're going to be looking at that chapter that you did, which was calling Choosing Peace Over Control. And so that is what we're going to be kind of focusing on this month. By now, most of you know my story. You know that for 16 years, you could find me hanging out with my best friend Ed, who was my eating disorder, because really he was my way of helping me to detach emotionally from my crappy life. And I remember it was during this time I was in college, and it was way more difficult than I had anticipated. And I was so afraid of flunking out. In fact, I was on probation twice for almost flunking out. And also, truth be told, I went to college to get my MRS degree. And so I was there desperately seeking a husband. And again, I didn't get that degree. The thing was, I was so afraid of failure. And so Ed, my eating disorder, helped me relieve that tension. And he helped me make myself feel better. And, I call that deceptive control. Satan, really, the God of this world, disguised himself as Ed, just like he did in the garden with Adam and Eve, and deceived them. He stole my dignity, my dreams, lied endlessly to me, and little by little destroyed my body. But my deceived mind believed that Ed, my God, was helping me, and he wasn't hurting me, because you know what? He was really good at reframing all my pain and my sin. So this also explains why I had absolutely no life goals during those years. I had no peace. Now, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he's famous for saying this: sow a thought and you reap an action. Sow an act and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny. Well, my destiny was living in bondage. I was living in bondage to that fear of rejection, and also this shameful sense of worthlessness. And what those did actually was lead to a series of learning experiences for me, because I learned that food and alcohol in abundance comforts and it regulates anxiety and fear. The more I ate, the more I drank, the better I felt, at least for a while. But I also learned that there was a dark side, and that dark side was called loss. Loss of control. Loss of control over my emotions, my actions, over my relationships, over time, over my memory, over money. But I believed it was all working for me. Viktor Frankl wrote, "The one thing you can't take away from me is the way I choose to respond to what you do to me." Now, if someone makes you feel unheard, misunderstood, unloved, guilty, shamed, worthless, then your sense of self is threatened, and you're going to do what you can do. I mean, it's really your brain, to make yourself feel secure again. We want to feel back in control, right? Because control makes us feel safe. Whereas losing control, as you know, induces massive amounts of stress. And so to avoid this, we become really masterful at finding ways to, we find coping mechanisms and other behaviors that actually do not speak out our thoughts, if you think about that. Interestingly, we choose some behaviors that actually are screaming, "See my pain," without actually speaking that out. And the thing is, I've mentioned this in one of the other talks, is we have two choices, to cope. When we have a situation, we can process through that pain, process through that situation, or we can disengage and choose a coping mechanism to help us forget about the anxiety, the pain, the tension. And usually, guess what? We choose the coping mechanism, don't we? Instead of choosing to try to deal with that situation or deal with the offender, we want to try to find a way to take back that control. to kind of undo all those symptoms. And this keeps us moving forward, and it keeps us functioning despite the fact that we have these feelings. We're feeling sad, we're feeling lonely, we're feeling depressed, we're angry, we're frightened. These feelings, even though we've pushed them away, are still very much alive in us. Another thing I was thinking about is how a coping skill also helps us deal with regret. How many times have you ever felt like, wow, I could have done something to prevent this situation or to have changed this situation? And it's interesting because I just read recently in a study that 69% of all situations are not changeable. But anyway, that regret that we have leads to that awful anxiety. Now, what I find really interesting about our coping mechanisms is they lead to biological changes in our brain. And that gives us those cravings that we have. And what happens with cravings? They turn into compulsions. And those compulsions become repetitive. And we then have these deep ruts in our thinking patterns that have been created. And that means they're no longer choices. In other words, our free will has been taken away. So like myself, many people find that their toxic feelings can be stopped most effectively through an eating disorder, or maybe substance abuse or self-harm. Now, my primary coping mechanism was food, and I began by dieting to deal with the anxiety that I felt over gaining 15 pounds, and also over the fat shaming tactics that my dad was throwing at me all the time. But soon it got out of control. It became a compulsion, and then it became an eating disorder, and I had no more free will left. And when we lose our free will, we're in bondage, and bondage is the opposite of peace. Now, I erroneously believed that dieting and food was going to help me regain some kind of control over my life and over my past. But it wasn't true. Here's a little rabbit trail for you. I just also read, someone made this comment I thought was kind of interesting, talking about food and feeding rituals. Of course, feeding rituals, dare I say potlucks, us getting together for those big meals with family and friends. Anyway, what he was saying is food and feeding rituals are riddled with symbolism. And the symbolism being they're nurturing, it's soothing, gratifying, and provides loving, sensuous pleasure. It kind of made a lot of sense to me. It also kind of made me think, no wonder our country has an eating disorder as well. So anyway, I kind of digressed there. But whether it's food or it's something else, what makes certain behaviors so appealing to us is that no one else can control that behavior, right? No one else can control my eating disorder. That's why I find it so appealing. But you know what? God has a whole different plan. Now, God doesn't ask that we stop craving, but he asks that we start to crave something different. And that would be him. Because then he can break the bondage, and that leads to peace. But we've got to make the decision that we're going to take those anxieties, we're going to take those troubles, and we're going to give it to him and know and have the confidence that he's going to take care of it in his time and his way. This is what we call surrender. It's also what we call faith. And he promises, this is Isaiah 46:4, I am your God, and I will take care of you until you are old and your hair is gray. I made you, I will take care of you, I will give you help, and I will rescue you. That is one of my favorite promises. I really believe that we've got to come to a place where we know our ways of coping just are not working any longer for us, and then we got to lay it all down at God's feet. Lay down our heart, our soul. As I look back in my life, boy, no matter what trouble I'd get into, I'd usually find a way out. Usually it was my controlling dad was the one that bailed me out. But the one thing he could never bail me out of was my eating disorder. And I didn't dare call him when I got a DUI and was in jail. So he didn't bail me out of that one because of the humiliating shame that I felt about that. But anyway, the day came, when I finally realized I have no more workable options. Now, I wasn't following Christ at that time, but I did believe in God, and I believed he was a power greater than myself and that he could help me. And so I do remember praying, God, I need you to help me. See, I was always dependent on someone else to tell me either how to fight my fight or do it for me. That was even better. But the Bible suggests that I surrender completely. But I had to be desperate in order to surrender. I had to really mean business. I had to be willing to humble myself to see clearly that I just am not as tough as I thought I was. And it's until we get desperate, we're going to try to do all our old tricks. We're maybe going to be hoping for a different result, which is what Albert Einstein called insanity. But it's usually not until we see the insanity and realize there's no better way, that's when we decide to surrender to God. And what we're surrendering is where we're stuck and all our old ways of thinking and acting, and we're surrendering our coping mechanisms. Now, for many of us, this is really scary. And the moment of surrender may feel like, oh my gosh, life is over. But it's not. It's the beginning of life. Surrender doesn't mean that you have failed. It doesn't mean you have lost control. It actually means the opposite, that you are strong and you are so courageous. And I can say that when we choose to surrender to God and we let him direct our lives, then it becomes manageable because we're one with God. Have you noticed that it's when we turn away from him, that's when the chaos and all the pain tends to set in? But you're never going to lose your way when you allow God to lead you. And I can personally attest that to God, no one is a lost cause. Isaiah 58:11, another promise that I love is, the Lord will guide you always. He will satisfy your needs in a sun-scorched land and will strengthen your frame. You will be like a well-watered garden, like a spring whose waters never fail. Wow. And that, just try to get a word picture of that, or an image in your mind of that. Let me wrap this up by saying that much of life is about God wooing us out of the darkness. He's never going to drag us into his light, but instead he gently draws us to himself. And it kind of reminds me of the story, remember, of the prophet Nathan. He was inspired by God to tell King David a story that was intended for King David to see the truth about himself. And when he saw the truth about himself, it was painful for him to see, but it was the beginning of a new chapter of his life. Now, when I realized that God's mission was to restore me and not condemn me for all the bad things that I had done, it was far easier to surrender. And I would challenge you to look at it in the same way. So I want to end today's message with a metaphor, and it's a metaphor you might have heard before. Think of God like electricity, and think of yourself like a lamp. We've got to plug into that electricity. Lamps without electricity cast no light, but neither does electricity without a lamp. But together, the electricity and the lamp all cast out the darkness. And to me, this is a picture of surrender and peace. It's being one with God, together casting out the darkness in our lives. So I think you have probably got a whole lot to chew on for tonight's session. I hope you enjoy rest of your summer. Stay cool and stay safe. And I will see you all here beginning September. Anyway, love you all. Bye for now.